Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network for and about Asian Americans in the capital region of New York. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available afterwards at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald. My name is Himani Gupta Carlson, and I am a local writer, farmer, and professor at Empire State College in Saratoga Springs. So tonight, we will take a look at an ancient religious symbol that has drawn increased controversy in modern times, the swastika. This symbol has been used in Hindu temples and rituals for many centuries. However, in the 1930s, a version of the swastika was appropriated by Germany's Nazi Party, where it became a marker of Aryan purity throughout the Holocaust. That interpretation of the swastika has remained in widespread use by neo-Nazi and other white nationalist groups. Such groups often paint it on the walls of Jewish synagogues, Muslim mosques, and Sikh gurdwaras that they vandalize. It also has shown up as graffiti on community sidewalks, buildings, and cars, to the extent that a bill was introduced in New York State in 2018 requiring an update of school textbooks that would treat the swastika as a symbol of racially motivated hate crimes, along with the noose, the image of the rope being tied for lynching of African Americans. So the bill passed the New York State Senate this summer and was sent to the State Assembly, where it was referred to the Education Committee, and that's the status of this at that point. So some members of the Hindu-Indian community object to the teaching of the swastika as a symbol of hate crimes and would like school textbooks to discuss this symbol's sacred roots more deeply. Our guest tonight is Samir Kalra, Managing Director of the Hindu-American Foundation. Mr. Kalra, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure to be here.
And it's our pleasure to be hosting you as well.
Thank you.
So before we get into the swastika, I'd actually like to find out more about the Hindu-American Foundation. So I'm wondering, can you please take a few minutes to tell us about the organization, its history, its mission, and some of its key projects in the United States?
Sure, absolutely. So the Hindu-American Foundation is a nonprofit advocacy organization that seeks to provide a voice for Hindu Americans of all backgrounds. We were started in 2003 by Hindu Americans that are second gen for the most part, that just wanted to take ownership of defining their own faith, their own traditions, and who we are as a community. And frankly, we're a little bit tired of Hinduism and Hindu Americans being defined by the media or by others. And so kind of an idea just sparked, and from there took off, and we founded formally. We now have a headquarters in Washington, D.C., and we have a staff of 12 all across the country, in addition to volunteer bodies. And our main mission is to promote mutual respect, dignity, and pluralism for all beings, for Hindus, and for the whole planet to thrive. We are an organization that seeks to educate the broader society about Hinduism and Hindu Americans. That can be through textbook curriculum, that can be through working with the media on dispelling stereotypes and misconceptions about Hindus. It also means working with teachers directly and training them on how to teach about Hinduism in the classroom and how to accurately teach about our traditions and our beliefs. We also work in the area of advocacy at the local, state, and federal level. So we work to educate policymakers on issues of importance to the Hindu-American community, ranging from issues like immigration, to hate crimes, to human rights and religious freedom, separation of church and state, and everything in between. And finally, we work to empower the community to build a culture of advocacy amongst the community to help them raise their voice and speak out on issues that are important to them, and also to give them the tools and the resources to be able to connect with their policymakers, to connect with their community, their interfaith communities and others, and to be able to be ambassadors for Hinduism and Hindu Americans.
Wow, it sounds like a very impressive list of goals that your organization has. I'm actually kind of curious because there are a number of other Hindu organizations in the United States, such as the World Hindu Council, the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, the Hindu Student Council, the Vedanta Society, the International Society of Christian Consciousness. And I was wondering, to what extent does your organization have a relationship with these other organizations? Do you affiliate with any of them? Do you work with them? Kind of what are your ties with those groups?
Sure. So first and foremost, the Hindu American Foundation is an independent, completely independent organization. So we don't affiliate formally with any organization, whether within the Hindu community or outside of the Hindu community. That being said, we absolutely work with groups within the Hindu community on issues of common concern. And we also work with, we believe in building coalitions both from within the community and outside the community. So we believe strongly in interfaith work. We believe strongly in bringing together groups that may have common interests on issues, whether they're from the Jewish community, Hindu community, African American community, Muslim community, Sikh community, etc. And so we have relationships and we work with groups whenever there is issues of common concern or we have common goals.
Okay, just wondering if you could maybe give an example of maybe a project or a common concern that you've dealt with recently.
Sure, absolutely. So, one example is on issues of separation of church and state, religious liberty, ensuring that, certain religious beliefs, in particular evangelical Christian morals, do not come into the school system or do not come into deciding who is eligible for contraception or who, should be getting certain rights in the workplace or other places. And so we've worked on coalitions with legal briefs to various courts. And we've joined with groups such as the Anti-Defamation League, ACLU. We just recently joined a brief, an amicus brief, or a friend of the court brief, with a Muslim organization, Muslim advocates, on a discrimination issue they were facing or they were working on. And so those are just a couple of examples on the domestic front. We work with very broad coalitions on hate crimes issues. Some of the similar groups that I mentioned there on hate crimes issues. And then within the community, we work with many groups, many of these groups on issues like temple safety and security, on education reform, on making sure that Hinduism and Hindus are represented better, immigration issues, green card reform in particular is a major issue and concern within the community because the number of the newer immigrants to this country that are Hindu, that are of Hindu backgrounds, are stuck in this long green card backlog and are waiting decades in some cases to be able to get permanent resident status here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's always kind of been an interesting issue for it, at least from my standpoint. My dad has a story about how he walked into an office in Cleveland and gave them a copy of his diploma and $1 and got his green card kind of approved right on the spot. But that was back in 1965, not in the present day. So things have definitely really changed in that respect. So turning now to the hate crimes instruction bills in New York State. There's actually two companion bills, one of which passed the Senate and one of which has been referred to committee in the Assembly. And the Senate bill expresses some deep concern about, and I'm quoting, the recent spike in hate crimes across the state and the nation as a whole, and really labels this increase in hate crimes as a societal epidemic in need of remedy. It then goes on to mandate that the state education system require instruction about the hateful connotations of such symbols as the swastika and the noose, with a goal of, then quoting again, fostering a more tolerant and inclusive society for all. And the House bill reads almost exactly the same. So, from the standpoint of advocacy, this seems to be a very laudable goal on the part of the state assembly. And I'm wondering what concerns the Hindu American Foundation might have really about these bills.
Sure. So just to start with, we absolutely agree with the intention of this bill, and it's a well-intentioned bill, and we agree about the need to educate about hate speech, hate symbols, and so in that sense, and we understand how some of these symbols have been used to perpetuate hate and to target certain groups, and so we absolutely believe in the spirit and the intent of the bill. At the same time, we believe that the language of the bill is very problematic because it stops short of really distinguishing between the misappropriated version of the swastika, which actually has been referred to as the Hakenkreuz or Hakenkreuz by the Germans themselves previously, and with the ancient Hindu, Jain, Buddhist symbol of the swastika, and which has a very peaceful, auspicious symbol. So our goal here is not to say that these types of issues should not be taught in the curriculum, but rather let's sit down together and let's work on better language that does talk about what the dangers of the hateful, misappropriated symbols have had and the impact that they've had, but also distinguish it very clearly from the swastika, the ancient Hindu swastika that is so commonly used, and how it has a peaceful meaning and people still use it. And we don't want to create a situation where Hindus, as they're practicing their beliefs and as they are practicing their traditions and using the swastika, are not thought of as anti-Semites or are not thought of as racist, but there's greater understanding and awareness about that meaning. So we would like to see the bill amended, or a new version of the bill come out that does address those concerns. And we're in touch with legislators. We've been in touch with the education committee, and we, be more than willing to work towards that goal, where we can, believe that there's an important perspective that needs to be taught, but at the same time, it also needs to be encompassing and accommodating of the actual peaceful and auspicious symbolism of the swastika. And we've had these conversations with many of our Jewish friends as well and Jewish organizations who agree with us and who we hope to work with on this endeavor.
Yeah, this issue has been around in various forms for decades, and I've always been curious about, just kind of how do you actually, in reality, make a differentiation between kind of like a very historic, ancient cultural meaning and a very recent, politicized, decidedly negative meaning. So I'm wondering, maybe you could help by just unpacking the swastika a little bit. What is its meaning? What is its role? What's its purpose? And what's its value in Hinduism?
Sure, absolutely. So swastika is a combination of two sounds, su and asti, which means basically good thoughts or good kind of vibrations. And so the general meaning of the swastika, as it's been used traditionally for Hindus and many other cultures, has been to start off religious ceremonies. For instance, a puja at a home or a temple would start by creating a swastika on a coconut, or in another place. The swastikas are often used to adorn the front of people's homes because it's meant as a welcome symbol to people and to bring auspiciousness and good fortune to the home and to welcome guests to the home and outsiders to the home. It's also the first thing that's drawn at the beginning of other festivals or ceremonies, weddings, for instance. Oftentimes wedding cards have swastikas on them. Or at the time of festivals, people will draw rangoli symbols or art symbols of the swastika, either in the house, outside the house, again, for the specific purpose of auspiciousness, good fortune, peace, and all of the symbolic nature associated with the swastika within the Hindu tradition and Jain and Buddhist traditions as well. In terms of what the symbolism means, so if you actually look at the swastika, first of all, the way the Hindu swastika is different than what we have come to know as the Nazi version of the swastika. The Hindu swastika is, it's the lines and the limbs are parallel. The Nazi version is tilted. Then within the Hindu swastika, the four limbs have a lot of significance. They can refer to the four Vedas, or the most sacred scriptures of the Hindus. They're also referred to as they're also used to represent the four goals of life in Hinduism. They also represent the four seasons, the four directions. So there's a lot of symbolism associated with why it's drawn with four limbs in particular. And all of them, again, deal with very peaceful, auspicious meanings, as opposed to, what we see with what's happened with the Nazi appropriated swastika. The other thing about the swastika is that it is something that I think is, while we keep talking about it as an ancient symbol, and now people can use it to a different extent, and I think that's the beauty of Hinduism, is people, use symbols in different ways, and they may or may not use it, or some may use it more than others, but it is still very commonly used today, both in the US and in India and many other countries around the world. I need not look any further than my own home, and where, in our home altar, my parents' home altar, and my own home altar, there's a coconut with a swastika on it. And so it is commonly used still in everyday practice. So while it is an ancient symbol, that symbol is still very relevant for many Hindu Americans and many Hindus around the world.
That's really interesting. So, I was born in 1962, and I was born in the United States. And I saw some statistics at one point that there's fewer than 50 of me or something like that. There's a very, very small number of me, American-born Indians in the United States, born before 1970 or something like that. And I do remember the swastika kind of being more widely used when I was a young child. And I also have memories of kind of drawing pictures of it, kind of using diagrams that my mother would give me. But it seems that it has fallen out of use in recent years, at least among some Indians, perhaps because of the connotations with Nazism. So, there are so many other ways of expressing goodwill and peace within the Hindu tradition. I'm thinking about the Om. I'm thinking about, the Namaste greeting and many other ways. And so I'm wondering, given how powerfully negative the Nazi version has become, why fight to retain this? Why not just kind of realize that times change, and in the pursuit perhaps of social justice, Hindus can let this one go?
Sure, and I think that's a great question. So a couple of things I'll say there is that there's actually been agreement amongst Jewish leaders, religious leaders, and advocacy groups, and Hindu spiritual leaders and advocacy groups about the auspicious meaning. So they understand that also, and they haven't called for Hindus to abandon that the symbol. In 2008, for instance, there was a Hindu-Jewish religious summit from religious leaders from both communities that met at a world level, and both kind of released a kind of a memo of understanding on a number of issues. But a part of it was recognizing both associations of the swastika. And I think even if you go to a website of a group like the Anti-Defamation League, they very clearly also recognize that while for many the misappropriated version, or the Hawking Cruise, has become associated in the minds of many Americans with hate, and a hate symbol, and a very painful symbol, they also recognize that for many other cultures that are here in the US and otherwise, it is a very peaceful symbol, and is a very auspicious symbol. And so I think, again, the use may be varied, but I think for a lot of Hindus, it is deeply still embedded in our everyday practices. And I see it, and I think that also depends on the area you may be in the country, and how big the community may be, and how open they feel. Right? I think some people may not use it out of fear, because we've gotten stories of people being bullied even recently. Brandeis University talking about the swastika, in other situations. And so there may be a fear in why people don't use it. But I think the answer to that is not to turn our backs on. The answer to that is to educate and raise awareness and find a space where we can have dialogue and have dialogue with our Jewish friends and other groups and try to raise awareness and education. And so you look at the intent of where the swastika is used and how it's used. Is it used in a hateful context? And how does the symbol look? Is it the Nazi, Hakenkreuz version of it, or is it the peaceful Hindu version of it? Is it been used in a manner that's intends to intimidate somebody, as opposed to something that's done as part of a celebration or a ceremony or a festival? And so I still think that education is the answer to that. And the parallel I would draw is that with the Ku Klux Klan, they used the cross, and they created it as a symbol of hate by using a burning cross. We don't ask Christians that, maybe it's time to abandon the cross. Rather, we say, let's educate people that this is a very, extreme, hateful use of the cross, but that is not the true symbolism of the cross. The true symbol of the cross has a much broader, peaceful, positive meaning. And so, that I think, is an example that we should be able to follow here as well in this context, is raising education and separating the two out.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how I'm always thinking about how do you teach something, because I am a professor after all, and that's one of the hats I wear, and I just wonder, how do you teach both the positive and the negative connotations always? So kind of moving on, I actually would like to almost flip the dialogue that we're having. So you brought up the principle of separation of church and state in the United States a little while ago. And that principle really encourages religious gatherings among followers of many faiths as private affairs. And so, in a way, that has made religion the space where immigrants who are non-Christian, particularly, find a sense of identity and build community. And so, I wonder if this bill were to pass in New York State and the Nazi symbol was spoken of as a hate crime, how would that really affect using the swastika in private worship? What would be some of the potential impacts from your perspective?
Sure. So I think, what we would consider private worship still, I think, has public implications in the sense that, if I am using the swastika in my own private home or my space, that may mean putting out on the front of the door because I want to have us, I want to have that symbol of auspiciousness and goodwill at the entrance of my door, which is often done. And so that, is my private worship and my private space. But at the same time, people coming by that door may not understand and may automatically think that it is now a hate symbol. Similarly, if somebody were to, come into a temple, oftentimes temples are trying to encourage, policymakers or other interfaith leaders to come into a temple. And if they see the swastika there, they're automatic. If they don't have that education, and if it is only defined as a hate symbol, they're going to assume that, and they're going to think differently about Hindus, and that's going to impact their perceptions. In a very practical level, in college campuses where Hindus may keep that in, how do you define what a private religious space is in a place like a college campus where you have dorms and there's a lot of shared spaces, and somebody's trying to use the swastika in their own personal worship, they may have a roommate, other people would be seeing that. So I think there's a lot of overlap between what we would consider our own personal private worship and, what would be considered public displays. And so it's hard to separate that. And so it would have an impact. And we've seen it have an impact. In fact, we have worked in a specific case in New York where one of our community members had a swastika at the front of their condo. They were in a homeowners association building, and there was an attempt to force them to take it down. Thankfully, we were able to help and educate the HOA on that and try to alleviate the situation. But that was their private beliefs. But it was part of that was a public display, and they were receiving, complaints, and they had tense relations with their neighbors and with the HOA. So it did directly impact their life. And we've seen that with college students as well. There's a current case in Brandeis University where a young girl who is, the student union president there, spoke up actually about this New York bill and talked about the swastika. And so even expressing her opinion about it has caused her to receive, threats and harassment, whatnot. So there is a direct impact for kids, people coming over to their houses, or them being able to openly display. And, I think for a lot of people, as an immigrant community, we don't want to feel that we have to hide our identity or hide our symbols and only keep it in private. We should be able to openly feel comfortable doing that. Then if we don't, we're not imposing it in the sense of requiring it to be in any public space, or requiring it to be associated with a government action. But in public, we should be free to display our own religious symbols and express our own religious beliefs.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you. That was actually a very, very educational and informative discussion about the swastika. We've got a few minutes left, so I'd actually like to just ask a few kind of more broader questions about the overseas Hindu community and the diaspora in general, as it pertains to the United States. As we both know, and as probably many of our viewers know, the Indian American community is probably one of the fastest growing Asian communities and the fastest growing kind of ethno-religious communities in the United States. And as that community has grown over the last 3 or 4 decades, it has really become much more ethnically and religiously diverse. There's, a number of different languages spoken, a number of different religions practiced, and there's also a number of different caste organizations. And so I'm kind of wondering, there's been with all of that has come a lot of criticism. So Equality Labs, for instance, has documented numerous instances of caste-based oppression, and really argues that one cannot delink caste from Hinduism, and that until Hinduism is abolished, caste will remain present among Indians as an unequal and oppressive power relationship. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that matter? How, if at all, might Hinduism evolve in a way that makes it fully free of caste?
Sure. So, first and foremost, as an organization, and the Hindu American Foundation, as Hindus, we absolutely condemn caste-based discrimination. And caste-based discrimination, wherever it occurs, is a violation of fundamental Hindu teachings and principles. Hindu scriptures, Hindu philosophy and spirituality repeatedly emphasize the importance of the divinity of all beings, not just humans, but all beings, and the equal divinity of all beings, regardless of gender, caste, religion, whatever the case may be. And so that is clearly, a fundamental part of our teachings, is that any type of discrimination is absolutely fundamentally against the concept of equal divinity in all beings. I would want to say that first and foremost. And the solutions, in our opinion, lie in Hindu teachings. In eradicating society of caste-based discrimination is in Hindu teachings, and going back to this, understanding that this is based on divinity, the equality of divinity. From there, I kind of want to just talk about what's happening in the U.S. And I know you referenced a group called Equality Labs, and so there is not actual very good data on whether this issue, how prevalent it is or is not in the U.S. The Equality Labs report is very unscientific. There are a lot of bias errors in there. Their sample size is small and limited, in the sense that they didn't even actually approach any Hindu organizations to help get respondents, and they're making sweeping generalizations. Equality Labs also, when they make statements like caste, Hinduism needs to be abolished, I think it shows that they're not really concerned about ridding caste-based discrimination, but they're more concerned about attacking Hinduism. They do have a track record of actually attacking Hindu festivals, such as Holi. They have a track record of demeaning Hindu children and students that were trying to testify at California State Board education hearings and talking about having a balanced and more nuanced view of Hinduism in the textbooks. And they also perpetuate, misinformation. A lot of their views are based on actual colonial era theories about Hinduism. And so that, that report and that organization are not, I don't think, representative of the issue. I do think it needs to be studied, and we do need good data on that. And if it does occur, and wherever it does occur, it does need to be confronted, and it does need to be addressed. Absolutely. But I think to say that, I think shows that, their intent is not positive or not intended to actually deal with the issue, because they don't even talk to lower caste communities or disadvantaged caste communities from within the Hindu community. They have not made any attempt to work with them or to survey them or collect data from them. And so I think that there's a severe limitation in what they are asserting, and their track record shows that they are what I would categorize as a hate group. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
I had noticed that the comment field had begun to fill up, so I was just taking a look at some of the comments in there.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, they're all kind of agreeing with you in many, many different ways. So just kind of one final question before we wrap up for the evening. And this is actually related to questions of conversion. So, many religions experience people who were maybe born into one faith, but then depart from another. And so many Indians have left the Hindu fold to follow other faiths, such as Buddhism, such as Christianity. But at the same time, a growing number of non-Indians find spiritual solace and power in such devotional practices as kirtan that have Hindu roots. And so I'm wondering, how might you see Hinduism remaining open to those who walk away from it, and also simultaneously welcoming those who are not born into the faith but drawn into it nevertheless?
Sure, absolutely. So I think in terms of regards to the first part about those that may be departing the Hindu faith, in Hinduism, again, another very fundamental principle is the truth is one, the wise call it by many names, meaning that people have many valid paths to reach the divine, and they have to follow a path that works for them. And so if they are leaving the faith out of their free will, and they're doing it in a way where they have not been preyed upon or converted out of unethical means, but they are doing it because they find solace in another spiritual path, that's wonderful. We have no issue with that. And I think that is, again, inherent to the teachings of Hinduism. And we also believe that you can simultaneously be a Hindu and find solace in a Buddhist path, in a Sikh path, in many other paths, and still be, by definition, a Hindu, because of the pluralistic beliefs that are inherent in Hinduism. And in terms of others coming into, the Hindu fold, I think that's wonderful that they find recognition in practices that have Hindu roots, such as kirtan, as you mentioned, such as yoga, meditation, Ayurvedic medicine, and many others. I think, for us, it's a question of that, we don't have any formal way to convert people into the faith. If you want to, by practice and by your deeds, become a Hindu and call yourself a Hindu or partake in Hindu practices, that's wonderful. I think what is important also is to also just recognize where some of these traditions come from and just acknowledge them. We're not saying this is only for Hindus, or we are only ones that can claim this, and therefore you have to be Hindu to practice these things. But no, just give recognition to that. And the reason for that is because we want to have our youngsters have a positive identity about being Hindu, and not just have this negative cows and curry stereotype about what it means to be a Hindu. And so giving acknowledgement, these are practices that have Hindu roots, and then everybody's open to practicing them, whether they want to call themselves Hindu or not. If they do, that's wonderful. We have a broad tent, and we welcome whoever wants to come into that tent, or whoever wants to, work with us or treat us with mutual respect, and we do the same.
Okay, so we covered quite a bit of material in this very short broadcast, and so I think you left us with a great deal to think about and chew on, and so I really thank you for joining us tonight. And I thank everyone else for joining us this evening for our weekly Asian American Herald show. Once again, I'm Himani Gupta Carlson, and our guest has been Mr. Samir Kalra of the Hindu American Foundation. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook-based news media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region. So please send us your story ideas and look for the recording of the show on our Facebook page. Thank you again, Samir, and have a very good evening.
Thank you so much, and namaste.
Namaste.